Hey folks, welcome to another episode of Cutter One. I am your host, Jay, just Jay, your resident troublemaker and your resident culture warrior. I hope you are all doing wonderful on this lovely, frigid-ass evening, at least here up in the Northeast where I am. That's what it is. It is cold. Well, it's not like freezing, but it's cold enough. Colder than I've been used to for the past couple of months anyway. I hope you're all doing well. So let's get right into it. Interesting story. And it is coming to us from the good folks over at Screen Rant. And let's see what they have to say. Obi-Wan's canon limitations prove a Star Wars problem. Star Wars' focus on legacy characters like Obi-Wan Kenobi might be hindering more ambitious storytelling due to the confines of established canon. There we go. So we have another story coming at us from the media where they are saying that, you guys wanting us to stick to the canon and stick to the lore, that's a bad thing, okay? Which is going to be a recurring theme we're going to see more and more of, as time goes on. But anyway, let's get into the meat of the story here. It says, Obi-Wan Kenobi's story was hampered due to the confines of Star Wars canon, and this problem will only get worse as the franchise continues to grow. Star Wars storytelling is vast and sprawling, spread across films, television, games, novels, and comic books. This would seem an impossible thing to keep track of, but one of Star Wars' strengths has always been its valiant attempts to remain faithful to the stories that came before, excluding most of the expanded universe. Okay, so right out of the gate, you're like, yeah, we're gonna, one of its things is to try and stick to this this established canon, except for that time when we got rid of most of the canon. But I digress. Now, however, as Star Wars narrative becomes grander and the details of its world building more obscure, the question remains whether sticking to canon, no matter the circumstances, is truly the right thing to do. One of Obi-Wan Kenobi's writers recently proclaimed via Gizmodo that rigidly sticking to Star Wars canon hindered the show's narrative possibilities. Obi-Wan is one of Star Wars' most infamous, I think they mean famous, characters, and his legacy is woven throughout many Star Wars eras. As such, any new content that included him needed to be respectful of what was known as well as present something new. This is a near impossible task without reinterpreting certain canon details. I'm calling bullshit on that one. Which is exactly what Obi-Wan Kenobi did. But while Star Wars should do everything in its power to produce the best possible entertainment, there's an argument that ignoring canon for the sake of storytelling negates the need for canon at all. Exactly. Obi-Wan couldn't avoid retconning Star Wars canon. Yes, it could. They just chose not to. Events between Star Wars Episode 3, Revenge of the Sith, and A New Hope are quite well established within the lore, meaning that more Star Wars legacy characters are used to tell a story during that period. The more restricted the story is going to be. The Obi-Wan Kenobi writers were left with an impossible task: how to tell a compelling story that brings something new to the table without ignoring everything that came before. This is why Obi-Wan Kenobi's story was initially expected to primarily involve Luke and Tatooine, and it came as a surprise when Leia was the co-star of the show instead. This surprise made for an unexpected story, certainly, but there was no way to tell it without reinterpreting certain events from the original trilogy. Leia and Obi-Wan's aloof interactions in A New Hope now make less sense, and even Darth Vader and Obi-Wan's duel in A New Hope has a completely different undertone since it became known that they met each other multiple times after their duel in Revenge of the Sith. These events don't necessarily cancel out the entirety of A New Hope, but they certainly give the film a different meaning. If canon status was an issue in telling the best Obi-Wan story possible, perhaps fewer legacy characters should have been involved. Star Wars canon problems will only get worse. With the advent of Disney+, Star Wars has only continued to grow. More creators are involved, and more stories are being told across bigger periods of the Star Wars timeline. Different creators mean different interpretations of certain characters, and changes to established canon are already being seen in more projects than just Obi-Wan Kenobi. For instance, Star Wars Rebels character Kanan Jarrus had his backstory laid out in a comic run entitled Canon, the Last Padawan, But that narrative was later retconned by Kanan's original creator, Dave Filoni, when the character cameoed in the pilot episode of Star Wars The Bad Batch. Plenty of other similar Star Wars retconning examples exist too. The bigger Star Wars story gets, the more fragile its canon will become. But maintaining a canonical history of events is one of Star Wars' fundamental pillars as a franchise. If Lucasfilm wants Star Wars canon to remain mostly intact, it might need to start thinking about branching further from the original Star Wars trilogy timeline. Looking to the past and exploring the future might open up more narrative possibilities and give creators the freedom to explore the galaxy without being tied to the minutiae of certain characters and events. The legacy characters like those involved in Obi-Wan Kenobi will always be important to Star Wars, but there are plenty of other storytelling opportunities left to discover. All right, so there's the article. All right, so yeah, interesting. Again, it highlights what I've been saying since I started this channel is Hollywood's creatively bankrupt. They are, and I'll say it, and I'll own it. Okay, Hollywood is creatively bankrupt. Now, can you tell good Star Wars stories without breaking the canon? Yes, absolutely you can. I would argue that not only can you tell good Star Wars stories without breaking the canon, it's almost better. Let me rephrase that. You can tell good Star Wars stories without breaking the canon. The problem that Hollywood has is they don't know how to tell good Star Wars stories without having to go in and try to use the whole member berries pulling on the strings of nostalgia aspect of it. That's why you see shows about Obi-Wan Kenobi. That's why you saw a solo standalone film. That's why you see all these Star Wars shows, whether it be Bad Batch or others, that make reference to known characters, Anakin, Obi-Wan, Darth Vader, Princess Leia, and so on and so forth. So they wanted to tell a new and interesting story with Obi-Wan using a legacy character. So you're taking a character has a backstory, but yet you're saying that you have to change the backstory to tell your story. Well, then why not just create a story with a character that doesn't have a backstory? Like, make one up. Okay? The reality is you wanted to make a show about Obi-Wan Kenobi again because it has a built-in fan base. You knew that you could pull Star Wars fans in by saying, we've got this Obi-Wan Kenobi show coming out. But at the same time, you wanted to have a completely new story. So you drag, Kid Leia into it and completely retcon A New Hope. The original Star Wars movie. And there's a reason why people love that one 40 years on. People will still sit down and watch that movie. I guarantee you next year, nobody's going to be watching Obi-Wan. Nobody's going to be watching this crap. And that's because, you can tell a good story. Literally, Star Wars takes place in a galaxy. You have an entire galaxy worth of characters that you can tell stories about. Okay, and you can reference Star Wars in many different ways with locations. The planet Tatooine, okay, the planet Coruscant. All these major known locations. Cloud City. Okay, you don't need to use the legacy characters as they call them. Okay, and then try to retcon their stories. That's just lazy writing. That is creatively bankrupt. It is. Look at the popularity of The Mandalorian. Okay? The Mandalorian, it's a completely original character. Yes, in later seasons there are references to things, that are like Boba Fett. They bring Boba Fett in, but that was just to kick off Boba Fett's own show, the Book of Boba Fett. By and large, all those characters, Gina Carano's character, Bill Burr's character, and stuff like that, they were all original characters. And it was a good story. Grogu, original character. Fans fell in love with. Okay? Yes, they bring in Luke at the end of the last season and stuff like that, but he's not a recurring character. In other words, they were able to find a way to tell a compelling Star Wars-based story without referencing legacy characters, and therefore avoided the problem of having canon get in the way. What you're seeing with Obi-Wan, when you hear these writers like the guy from Obi-Wan Kenobi complaining about canon, and what this article is basically saying is that you want to have your cake and eat it too. You want to be able to be a lousy hack writer, okay, who can't come up with something wholly original, and yet at the same time you want to have it be a legacy character, or a legacy, be tied to legacy enough that you can bring in fans of the legacy character, but you want to have the ability to change it to tell your story. Okay, and that's just lazy. That's just the epitome of lazy. Do what they did with The Mandalorian. Create an entirely new character. You have a whole galaxy worth to pick from. But that's just my opinion. You guys let me know what you think down in the comments below. If you like the video, give it a like. If you want to share the video, please try it in English. If you want to share the video, please feel free to do so. And if you have not subscribed already, I would hope that I can earn your subscription. We're trying to build this thing up. If you are a returning subscriber, thank you very much. You are appreciated, and you guys are all beautiful badasses. That's what you are. Until then, I will see you on the next one. Peace.